Imagine waking up on the Great Plains. The fire is almost gone. The wind is freezing. And when you look inside the food stores, there is almost nothing left. No supermarket, no refrigerator, no truck bringing supplies, and no guarantee that tomorrow's hunt will succeed. For the Comanche, this wasn't simply a bad day. It could mean the difference between life and death. So what did Comanche warriors eat when food became scarce? And how did an entire community survive when the animals they depended on were nowhere to be found? The answer begins with one animal, the buffalo. For the Comanche, the buffalo was far more than meat. It was one of the foundations of life on the plains. Fresh buffalo meat provided protein and fat, but the animal could provide much more than that. The hide could become clothing, blankets, teepee coverings, and other essential materials. Bones could be turned into tools. Sinew could be used for cords and bindings. Almost nothing useful was simply thrown away. But there was a problem. Buffalo were not always easy to find. Herds moved across enormous distances. Weather could change, hunting could fail, and during difficult seasons, a community could suddenly face a serious shortage of food. That is when survival depended on something more important than a successful hunt: preparation. A common mistake is imagining plains people as hunters who simply killed an animal, ate the meat, and moved on. Real survival was much more complicated. When food was available, people could preserve it. Meat could be dried into jerky. Fat could be saved and combined with dried meat and other ingredients to create long-lasting food. These preserved foods were valuable because they could survive periods when fresh meat was difficult to obtain. That meant a successful hunt could help feed people long after the hunt itself was over. The goal wasn't simply, how much can we eat today? It was, how can we make this food last? That difference could keep a family alive during a difficult period. But what happened when hunting failed? This is where adaptability became critical. The Comanche lived across a huge and changing environment. Their diet wasn't limited to one single food. Depending on location and season, they could use other available animals and plant foods: deer, antelope, smaller game, birds, fish in suitable areas, and wild plants could all become sources of food. The exact foods available depended heavily on where a group was located and what the environment offered at that particular time. This flexibility mattered, because nature doesn't care about human plans. A storm could disrupt the hunt. A herd could move away. A drought could reduce available resources. A winter could make everything harder. Survival meant being ready to change. There was another reason certain foods were especially valuable: fat. In a cold environment, the body needs energy to maintain its temperature. That made high-energy foods extremely important. Buffalo provided not only lean meat, but also valuable fat. People could preserve and store fat for later use. This meant a successful hunt could provide something much more important than a single meal. It could provide stored energy for the future, and that changed the way food was viewed. A piece of meat wasn't simply dinner. It could be tomorrow's survival. And the story of food wasn't only about warriors. Behind every successful hunt, there was a community. Different people performed different tasks. Hunters pursued the animals. Others processed the meat. Food had to be prepared, preserved, transported, stored, and distributed. This cooperation was essential because a large animal could provide enormous amounts of resources, but only if the entire community worked efficiently. The survival of one person depended on the survival of many others. A warrior could be an excellent hunter, but even the greatest hunter couldn't preserve hundreds of pounds of meat alone. Survival was collective. The Comanche were highly mobile people, and mobility itself was one of their greatest survival advantages. If food became scarce in one area, remaining there indefinitely could become dangerous. But a mobile people could move toward better opportunities. Their horses transformed life on the plains. They allowed the Comanche to travel great distances, follow moving herds, and respond quickly when environmental conditions changed. This didn't make survival easy, but it gave them options. And sometimes, having options is the difference between starvation and survival. There were still times when conditions became extremely difficult. Imagine a winter storm, a failed hunt, and several days with little fresh food. At that point, people couldn't simply wait for conditions to improve. They had to use whatever resources were available: preserved meat, stored fat, small game, available plants, anything that could safely provide nourishment could become important. This is one of the most important lessons of survival history. People didn't survive because they always had plenty. They survived because they knew how to use what they had. The most valuable survival tool wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even a horse. It was knowledge. Knowing where animals moved. Knowing when certain plants were available. Knowing how to preserve meat. Knowing how to store food. Knowing how to read the weather. And knowing when it was time to move. This knowledge was built over generations. Children didn't grow up with survival manuals. They learned by watching, listening, practicing, and living within the environment around them. Every generation added to a knowledge system that had already been built by those who came before. And perhaps this is the most important part of the story. When food became scarce, a Comanche warrior wasn't necessarily facing hunger alone. He belonged to a family, a band, a community. Resources could be shared, knowledge could be shared, work could be shared, and responsibility could be shared. That social structure was itself a survival system. Because surviving a harsh environment isn't always about having the strongest individual. Sometimes, it's about having the strongest community. So, what did Comanche warriors eat when food was scarce? The answer wasn't one magical food. It was adaptation. Buffalo when they were available. Preserved meat when fresh food was difficult to find. Fat for valuable energy. Other animals and plants when the environment offered them. And above all, knowledge, preparation, mobility, and cooperation. The Comanche didn't survive the Great Plains because the land was easy. They survived because they learned how to live with a land that could be incredibly generous and incredibly unforgiving. Their greatest weapon against hunger wasn't simply the ability to hunt. It was the ability to adapt. Because when the food disappeared, the people who understood their environment still had a chance. This is Midnight History, where the past is not just remembered, it is understood.